Jason's bag dropped to the floor with a heavy sound, yet the ache in his heart felt much more intense. Could it be true that he'd just been kicked out simply for being the child of a farmer? The principal's harsh statement kept replaying in his thoughts. This institution serves proper families. You have no place here. Fighting back his emotions, Jason made his way home, fearing his parents' expressions when they learned the news. However, the following day, when a wealthy person's aircraft thundered above the academy, everyone, students and faculty alike, stood paralyzed with amazement. Before we continue, please like this content and share your location in the comments. Engagement allows us to create more compelling narratives. Now, let's proceed. Jason clutched his bag firmly while standing near the administrator's door, his pulse racing wildly. Never before had he experienced such deep embarrassment. The administrator's harsh, penetrating stare made him feel tiny and worthless. "You have no business at this academy, Jason," the official declared, his tone filled with contempt. "This establishment caters to pupils with genuine promise from proper households, not for children from agricultural families." Those statements struck Jason like a physical blow. He'd always understood he differed from his classmates at Westbridge Academy. While his peers arrived in luxury vehicles wearing expensive clothing, Jason appeared in used athletic shoes, carrying the faint scent of earth he helped his father cultivate each dawn before classes. Yet he never expected to be removed simply for that background. His hands formed fists, knuckles becoming pale. "I put in equal effort as everyone else," he declared, his voice trembling. "I secured my position through my academic performance." The administrator smiled mockingly. "Academic scores aren't sufficient. We maintain certain standards, and pupils like yourself, well, you diminish our reputation." The door opened, and two security officers entered. Jason's insides twisted as he understood the situation. "Remove him," the administrator commanded. The officers seized Jason's arms, pulling him toward the entrance while students in the corridor paused to observe. Some murmured, others chuckled. He noticed Mason, the wealthiest student in school, resting against the lockers with a satisfied expression. "Looks like you finally received your due, country boy," he mocked. Jason's muscles tensed, but he remained silent. He wouldn't provide them the pleasure of witnessing his breakdown. Upon reaching home, his parents waited on the veranda. His mother's eyes showed concern while his father appeared serious. "They removed me," Jason whispered, his voice constrained. His mother gasped, placing her hand over her mouth. His father sighed deeply and embraced Jason firmly. "We'll find a solution," he promised, though Jason detected doubt in his tone. That evening, Jason lay awake, staring upward, fury and humiliation consuming him. He'd committed no wrongdoing, yet had been discarded as if worthless. He longed for someone with influence to defend him, someone who could demonstrate his value. The following morning, as classes prepared to commence at Westbridge Academy, a thunderous noise filled the atmosphere. Students rushed outdoors, protecting their eyes from sunlight as the enormous black aircraft descended onto the school's front courtyard. The rotating blades created powerful wind currents that swept through the gathering. Instructors exchanged puzzled looks. The administrator stormed outside, his face crimson with annoyance. "What's the purpose of this?" he shouted. Then the aircraft door opened, and the entire institution fell silent. The complete academy remained motionless as the helicopter's mighty blades generated waves of dust and wind throughout the area. Students protected their faces, hair swirling frantically. Some whispered, others retrieved phones to record the event. Nobody had witnessed anything comparable at Westbridge Academy, though the school held prestige. Even for them, a wealthy person's helicopter landing on their front grounds was unprecedented. The administrator's expression contorted with rage as he approached, his voice barely audible over the deafening sound. "Who permitted this? Who do you think you are?" he yelled, attempting to maintain authority over the circumstances. Yet nobody listened to him. All attention focused on the helicopter's door as it slowly opened. A man emerged, his presence commanding instant respect. He stood tall, dressed in an elegant dark suit, his shoes polished flawlessly. His sunglasses reflected the astonished faces of students and staff. Behind him, two additional men in costly suits followed, their expressions indecipherable. However, it was the symbol on the helicopter's side that sent shockwaves through the crowd. Kingston Enterprises. Everyone recognized that name, the nation's largest agricultural corporation, controlling vast industries from food manufacturing to land development. The man before them was Samuel Kingston himself. among the wealthiest and most influential figures in the business realm. The administrator's anger wavered, replaced by nervous uncertainty. He straightened his tie, clearing his throat as he stepped forward. "Mr. Kingston," he said, forcing politeness, "this is certainly unexpected. How may I assist you?" Samuel Kingston didn't respond immediately. He removed his sunglasses, scanning the crowd with sharp eyes before finally speaking. "I've come for Jason Miller," he stated, his voice steady and commanding. Surprised gasps rippled through the students. Jason, the farm boy they'd ridiculed just yesterday. The same Jason who'd been expelled in disgrace. The administrator blinked. Caught off guard, he released a forced laugh. "Ah, Jason, I see. Well, Mr. Kingston, I'm afraid he's no longer enrolled at our institution." Samuel Kingston's eyes grew dark. "I'm aware," he replied. "That's precisely why I'm here." Jason's name spread throughout the school like wildfire. Those who'd mocked him now exchanged disbelieving glances. Mason, who'd particularly enjoyed Jason's humiliation, shifted uncomfortably, his smirk completely gone. Inside his home, Jason remained in bed, staring at the ceiling. He'd spent most of the night reliving the previous day's events, the humiliation cutting deeply. His parents had attempted to comfort him, but their words barely eased his inner pain. He'd worked tremendously hard to earn his place at Westbridge, only to be dismissed as if he meant nothing. Then he heard the unmistakable roar of a helicopter. The entire house trembled slightly from the vibration. Jason bolted upright, his heart pounding. Who would land a helicopter in their small town? His father already stood at the door, face pale with confusion. Jason quickly put on a shirt and ran outside, his breath catching at the sight before him. Parked directly outside their modest farmhouse was the same helicopter that had just landed at Westbridge, and stepping out with the kind of presence that could move mountains was Samuel Kingston. Jason's mother clutched her husband's arm, her voice barely audible. "That's Samuel Kingston." Jason could hardly breathe as the billionaire made eye contact with him and stepped forward. Jason felt frozen as Samuel Kingston approached him. The billionaire's presence was overwhelming, his movements precise and controlled. His expensive shoes crunched against the gravel of their farmhouse driveway, and Jason could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. His parents stood beside him, their expressions caught between wonder and bewilderment. "You are Jason Miller," Kingston declared, his voice carrying authority. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, as if he already knew everything about him. Jason swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, sir." Samuel Kingston studied him momentarily before glancing around at the modest farmhouse, the surrounding fields, and the weathered old truck parked near the barn. His eyes returned to Jason, and then, to everyone's amazement, he extended his hand. "Your father is Benjamin Miller," Kingston said, turning slightly toward the older man. "We collaborated many years ago." Jason's father hesitated before accepting the handshake. "Yes, sir. I worked on one of your early agricultural projects when I was younger." Kingston gave a slight nod. "And from what I understand, your son was expelled from Westbridge Academy yesterday." Jason felt his stomach drop. The shame of that moment returned, along with the humiliation of being thrown out like he was worthless. He glanced away, clenching his jaw. "Yes," he admitted quietly. Kingston's expression remained unreadable. "Tell me what happened." Jason hesitated, but his father gave him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, he recounted everything: the principal's unfair decision, the way Mason and his friends had mocked him, and how he'd been dismissed as if he didn't belong. By the time he finished, his hands were clenched into fists. There was a long silence. Kingston turned to one of the men standing behind him, a tall, sharp-looking assistant. "I want a complete report on Westbridge Academy's board and administrative history. Now." The assistant nodded immediately, pulling out a tablet and typing. Kingston turned back to Jason, his gaze intense. "I don't tolerate injustice. Your father was one of the hardest working men I've ever met. And if you have even half of his determination, then Westbridge made a grave mistake." Jason's father's eyes widened. "Sir, I appreciate you coming here," but Kingston held up a hand. "This isn't about appreciation, Benjamin. This is about setting things right." He turned back to Jason. "Get in the helicopter." Jason's breath caught. "What?" Kingston's tone was firm. "You're coming with me? We have unfinished business at Westbridge Academy." Jason's mother took a worried step forward. "Sir, what exactly are you planning?" Kingston glanced at her with a calm but unwavering expression. "I'm going to make sure your son gets the future he deserves." Jason exchanged a stunned look with his parents. A day ago, he had lost everything. Now one of the most powerful men in the country was standing in his driveway, telling him to step into a billionaire's helicopter. Jason took a deep breath. This was insane. This was impossible. And yet, deep down, something told him his life was about to change forever. The roar of the helicopter blades filled Jason's ears as he strapped into the leather seat. He could hardly believe what was happening. Just yesterday he'd been humiliated and expelled, feeling like nobody. Now he sat beside Samuel Kingston, a billionaire whose name carried more power than the entire school board combined. As the helicopter lifted off, Jason glanced out the window. His parents stood below, watching with expressions of shock and uncertainty. His mother clutched his father's arm, as if unsure whether to be proud or afraid. Jason swallowed hard. He had no idea what awaited him, but he knew one thing: this wasn't just a ride. This was a mission. Kingston sat calmly, reading something on a tablet while one of his assistants whispered updates to him through a headset. Jason could feel the weight of his presence. Every move he made was calculated. Every word carried importance. After a few minutes, Kingston turned to him. "Do you know why I'm doing this?" Jason hesitated. "Because you knew my father." Kingston nodded but leaned slightly closer. "That's part of it, but there's another reason. I don't believe in wasted potential." He tapped the screen of his tablet, turning it toward Jason. "You have a perfect academic record. You scored higher than 99% of students in the state on your exams. You're not a troublemaker. You were expelled because of prejudice, not because of anything you did wrong." Jason's eyes widened. He'd known he worked hard, but hearing it spoken like that as if his value was undeniable sent a strange rush through him. Kingston continued, "I built my empire from nothing. People like Westbridge's principal believe success is only for those born into privilege. They think they decide who deserves opportunity. They're wrong." Jason clenched his fists. For the first time since his expulsion, he felt something shift inside him, not just anger, but a deep sense of purpose. The helicopter began its descent. Jason saw the familiar rooftop of Westbridge Academy growing larger beneath them. The school looked just as imposing as ever, its stone walls and massive front entrance designed to intimidate. Students and staff were already gathered outside, staring up in confusion and awe. Some pointed, whispering to each other. The moment the helicopter touched the ground, Kingston unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out with the confidence of a man who owned everything he walked upon. Jason followed, his heart pounding. Principal Whitmore stood among the crowd, his face pale as he recognized the man approaching. Kingston didn't slow down. He walked straight toward the man who had thrown Jason out, stopping inches away from him. "I assume you know who I am," Kingston said, his voice calm but sharp. Whitmore swallowed hard. "Mr. Kingston." Kingston cut him off. "You made a mistake. A very expensive one." He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping over the gathered students, teachers, and board members who had come outside. "This school claims to shape the future, yet it discards hardworking students like Jason Miller without a second thought." The principal tried to interject. "Sir, this is a misunderstanding." Kingston ignored him. He turned to one of his assistants. "How much is the largest donation ever made to Westbridge Academy?" The assistant checked a file. $1 million, sir." Kingston nodded slowly. Then, in a voice that carried across the entire courtyard, he said, "I will donate $10 million today. Under one condition." Silence fell. Everyone stared at him, waiting for his next words. He turned back to Whitmore. "You will reinstate Jason Miller immediately, and you will publicly apologize." Whitmore's face turned red. "Mr. Kingston, that's highly irregular." Kingston's expression didn't change. "You have 5 seconds to decide." Jason stood frozen, watching the most powerful man he'd ever met take control of the very institution that had tried to destroy him. "Principal." Whitmore's lips parted, but no words came out. His eyes darted between Kingston, the board members, and the sea of students who were now recording the scene with their phones. The entire school was holding its breath, waiting for his response. Jason stood motionless, his heart pounding so loudly he could hear it in his ears. Was this really happening? The man who had thrown him out, who had called him an embarrassment, now had mere seconds to reverse his decision or risk the wrath of a billionaire. Kingston checked his watch. 4 seconds. Whitmore cleared his throat. "Mr. Kingston, I understand your concerns, but these matters require proper 3 seconds. Sweat formed on Whitmore's brow. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. The weight of Kingston's offer and his power pressed down on them like an iron fist. $10 million was a fortune the school could not afford to lose. 2 seconds, Kingston said, his voice even but the warning unmistakable. Whitmore inhaled sharply, then let out a forced chuckle. Of course, we would be honored to welcome Jason Miller back. This has all been a misunderstanding. His voice trembled slightly as he turned toward the students and staff. I deeply regret any unfair treatment Jason may have received. As the principal, I take full responsibility for this oversight and officially reinstate him immediately. Jason's stomach tightened. The apology sounded rehearsed, hollow, but it didn't matter. He had one. Kingston didn't react right away. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make Whitmore sweat even more. Then, with a small nod, he gestured toward his assistant. The paperwork will be sent to your office. Make sure it's processed today. Whitmore nodded quickly, wiping his forehead. Yes, of course. The moment he stepped back, the students erupted in whispers. Some of them grinned at Jason. Others looked completely stunned. He could hear bits and pieces of their murmurs. I can't believe this. He got expelled yesterday and now he's back. A billionaire just fought for him. Jason exhaled slowly, trying to process what had just happened. Less than 24 hours ago, he'd been humiliated in front of the entire school. Now he had returned in a helicopter, backed by one of the most powerful men in the country. Kingston turned to him. This isn't just about coming back, he said quietly. This is about what comes next. Jason nodded, unsure of what to say. Kingston had saved him, but he had a feeling this was only the beginning of something much bigger. The billionaire looked at his assistant and gestured toward the waiting helicopter. Let's go, we have work to do. Jason hesitated. Wait, I have to stay, right? Kingston smiled slightly. You can, if you want, but I'm offering you something better. Jason's stomach flipped. Better. Kingston stepped closer, lowering his voice. I'm funding a new scholarship program for students like you, students who work hard but are overlooked. You'll be its first recipient. Jason blinked. What does that mean? It means you won't just be returning to this school. You'll be moving forward. I want you to train under my team, learn from the best. Education is important, but experience is what sets leaders apart. You have potential, Jason, and I intend to make sure you use it. Jason felt his throat tighten. A part of him wanted to stay, to prove to Whitmore and the rest of the school that he belonged here. But another part of him knew the truth. This was bigger than Westbridge Academy? This was his chance to break free from everything that had held him back. His father's words echoed in his mind. Opportunities don't wait, son. When one knocks, you open the door. Jason swallowed hard and met Kingston's gaze. I'm in. Jason took a deep breath as he stepped toward the helicopter. The moment felt unreal. Less than 24 hours ago, he'd been humiliated, expelled, and told he would never succeed. Now he was about to leave Westbridge Academy with a billionaire who saw something in him no one else had. His father, standing a few feet away, watched him. Carefully, Jason turned toward him, searching his face for any hesitation. But instead of worry, his father's eyes held something else. Pride. You always told me to grab opportunities, Jason said. This is the biggest one I've ever had. His father nodded. You're right. Go make something of yourself, son. Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth. Jason swallowed hard. He wanted to say more, but the roar of the helicopter blades made conversation difficult. Kingston's assistant gestured for him to climb in. He glanced back one last time at the students, teachers, and the stunned faces of those who had doubted him. Then, without looking back again, he stepped inside. The door closed, and within seconds, the helicopter lifted off. The entire school shrank below him, the crowd of students becoming nothing more than tiny dots. Jason leaned back in his seat, his mind still racing. Kingston sat across from him, his expression unreadable. You made the right decision, Kingston said. Jason exhaled. It feels unreal. Kingston nodded. That feeling will pass. Soon you'll realize this is exactly where you're meant to be. Jason glanced out the window, watching as they soared above the city. Where are we going? Kingston smiled slightly. To your future. They landed on the rooftop of a skyscraper in the heart of the city. Jason's breath caught as he stepped out. The building was massive, sleek, and modern. A giant logo gleamed on the side. Kingston Enterprises. Kingston led him inside, past security checkpoints and into a high-tech office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Jason had never seen anything like it. "You're going to learn everything here," Kingston said. "Business, leadership, innovation. You're not just a student anymore, you're an apprentice." Jason's heart pounded. "Why me?" Kingston studied him for a moment. "Because you remind me of myself. I was once the boy no one believed in, but someone gave me a chance. Now it's my turn to do the same for you." Jason felt a lump in his throat. He thought back to the days he'd spent working on the farm, the struggles, the people who had underestimated him, and now here he was, standing in the office of one of the most powerful men in the world. Kingston placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is only the beginning. You're going to prove them all wrong." Jason nodded. For the first time in his life, he didn't just hope for a better future. He knew it was coming. Enhanced version with advanced storytelling techniques. The weight of Jason's backpack hitting the concrete echoed like a gunshot through his soul. But the searing agony that tore through his chest threatened to bring him to his knees. Expelled. The word carved itself into his mind like a brand, burning deeper with each heartbeat. How could this be real? How could 16 years of dreams, of clawing his way up from nothing, of proving himself worthy, how could it all crumble because his father worked the soil instead of boardrooms? Principal Carter's voice slithered through his memory like poison. "This school is for respectable families. You don't belong here." Each syllable was a dagger, each pause, a twist of the blade. Jason's vision blurred as tears fought to break free, but he swallowed them back, tasting salt and shame. His footsteps felt leaden as he walked home, each step taking him further from everything he'd ever wanted. The weight of his parents' disappointment loomed ahead like a storm cloud, ready to shatter what remained of his fractured heart. But tomorrow would bring something that would shake the very foundations of Westbridge Academy. Before we dive into this tale of transformation, show your support by hitting that like button and telling us where you're watching from. Your engagement fuels our mission to bring you stories that ignite the soul and challenge the status quo. Now, let's witness Jason's extraordinary journey. The brass nameplate on Principal Carter's door might as well have read executioner. Jason's trembling fingers clutched his backpack straps like a lifeline as his heart hammered against his ribs with the fury of a caged animal. The hallway stretched behind him, a gauntlet of whispers and pointed stares from students who'd already decided his fate. Principal Carter's office felt like a tomb. The man himself sat behind his mahogany desk like a king on his throne, his cold, calculating eyes dissecting Jason piece by piece. When he spoke, his voice dripped with the kind of venom reserved for those deemed unworthy. "You don't belong in this school, Jason." The words sliced through the air with surgical precision. "This institution is for students with real potential, from respectable families. Not for farm boys who think they can play in our league." The impact was devastating. Jason felt something inside him crack, not just his heart, but his very sense of self. He'd always known he was different from the other students at Westbridge Academy, while they glided through the gates in vehicles worth more than his family's annual income, draped in designer labels that cost more than his father's monthly earnings. Jason arrived each morning in secondhand shoes that still carried the honest scent of earth, the same earth that had calloused his hands and strengthened his resolve. But this public execution of his dreams, he'd never seen it coming. His hands slowly curled into fists, knuckles whitening like bone. "I earned my place here," he said, his voice a tremor of barely controlled rage and heartbreak. "My grades, my scores, they speak for themselves." Carter's smile was a masterpiece of cruelty. "Grades," he laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Grades are nothing without pedigree, boy. We have a reputation to maintain, standards. And students like you." He paused, savoring the moment. "Well, you lower the bar." The office door burst open like the gates of hell. 2 security guards filled the doorway, mountains of muscle and indifference. Jason's world tilted as the reality crashed over him like ice water. "Escort him out," Carter commanded with the casual dismissal of someone swatting a fly. They seized him, hands like vices on his arms, and began dragging him toward his public humiliation. The hallway had transformed into an amphitheater of mockery. Students lined the walls like spectators at a gladiatorial combat, some whispering behind manicured hands, others openly laughing at his downfall. And there, leaning against the lockers, like a prince surveying his kingdom, stood Mason Blackwood, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune and the architect of Jason's daily torment. His smile was poison-wrapped in privilege. "Guess you finally learned where you belong, farm boy," Mason sneered, each word calculated to inflict maximum damage. Back in the dirt where you came from. Every muscle in Jason's body screamed for violence, for justice, for the satisfaction of wiping that smirk off Mason's face. But he wouldn't give them the pleasure. He wouldn't break, not here, not like this. The walk home felt like a funeral march. Each step carried him further from his dreams and closer to the crushing weight of his parents' shattered hopes. They were waiting on the porch, his mother's face etched with worry lines that seemed to have aged her years in a single day. His father's expression, a mask of barely contained fury and helplessness. "They expelled me," Jason whispered, the words scraping his throat raw. His mother's gasp was like a physical blow. Her hand flew to her mouth as tears began streaming down her weathered cheeks. His father, the strongest man Jason had ever known, seemed to shrink before his eyes. "We'll figure something out," his father said, pulling Jason into an embrace that felt like both shelter and surrender. But Jason heard what lay beneath the words. The uncertainty, the fear, the terrible knowledge that some fights couldn't be won with hard work and determination alone. That night, Jason lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling that had witnessed 1,000 dreams and now felt like the lid of a coffin. Rage and shame battled for control of his soul. He'd done nothing wrong, nothing, yet he'd been discarded, like yesterday's garbage. In his darkest moment, he made a wish that felt both desperate and impossible. For someone with real power to see his worth, to stand up for him, to prove that he mattered. He had no idea that tomorrow, his wish would be answered by forces beyond his wildest imagination. Dawn broke over Westbridge Academy like any other morning, but the air itself seemed charged with anticipation, as if the universe was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. Students filed through the gates, their conversations blending into the usual symphony of privilege and presumption. Then the sky began to tremble. The sound started as a distant whisper, growing louder, more insistent, until it became an earth-shaking roar that seemed to come from the heavens themselves. Students froze mid-sentence, their faces turning skyward as a massive shadow passed over the sun. The helicopter that descended upon Westbridge Academy wasn't just any aircraft, it was a mechanical monster. Sleek and black as judgment itself, its rotors carved through the air with the authority of destiny, sending powerful gusts of wind that whipped through the crowd like the breath of gods. Faculty members stumbled from the building, their usual composure shattered by this unprecedented invasion of their ordered world. Principal Carter burst through the front doors, his face a canvas of rage and confusion. "What is the meaning of this?" he bellowed into the chaos, his voice barely audible over the thunderous percussion of the rotor blades. Then the aircraft touched down, and silence fell like a curtain. The door opened with mechanical precision, and every soul on that campus, from the groundskeepers to the board members, felt the shift in the very fabric of reality. This wasn't just the arrival of wealth or power, this was the arrival of someone who could reshape destinies with a single word. The man who emerged from that helicopter wasn't just tall, he commanded space itself. His dark suit was tailored to perfection, each line speaking of wealth beyond imagination. His shoes caught the sunlight like polished obsidian, but it was his presence that truly dominated, an aura of absolute authority that made everyone else seem like shadows in comparison. Behind him, two additional figures emerged, whose very bearing spoke of influence and capability, but it was the insignia blazoned on the helicopter's hull that sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd. Kingston Enterprises. That name was more than a company, was an empire. Agricultural dominance that stretched across continents, technological innovations that shaped industries, political influence that could topple governments, and the man standing before them, removing his sunglasses with the casual confidence of someone who owned the world, was Samuel Kingston himself. Principal Carter's rage crumbled like a sandcastle before the tide. His face went pale as recognition dawned, followed by a flicker of something that might have been terror. "Mr. Kingston," he stammered, his voice cracking like an adolescent's, This is certainly unexpected. How can we help you?" Kingston's gaze swept across the assembled crowd with the methodical precision of a predator selecting prey. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of mountains and the cutting edge of winter wind. "I am here for Jason Miller." The reaction was instantaneous and electric. Gasps rippled through the student body like a shock wave. Jason Miller, the farm boy they'd mocked, the nobody they'd cast aside. The expelled failure who'd been forgotten before the ink on his dismissal had dried. Carter blinked rapidly, his mind struggling to process this impossible turn of events. He forced a laugh that sounded more like a death rattle. "Ah, Jason. Yes, well, Mr. Kingston, I'm afraid he's no longer a student at our institution. You see, I am aware. Kingston's words cut through Carter's explanation like a blade through silk. That is precisely why I am here. Meanwhile, miles away in a modest farmhouse that seemed to exist in a different universe from Westbridge Academy, Jason lay trapped in his own private hell. Sleep had abandoned him, leaving him to wrestle with demons of shame and shattered dreams. The ceiling above his bed had become a screen onto which his failures played in endless, torturous loop. Then the earth began to shake. The helicopter's approach was felt before it was heard, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very bones of the world. Jason bolted upright, his heart hammering as the sound grew from whisper to roar to earth-shaking thunder. His father appeared in the doorway, face drained of color. "Jason," he said, his voice barely audible over the mechanical storm outside. "You need to see this." Jason threw on clothes and raced outside, emerging into a scene that belonged in dreams or nightmares. Not in the quiet reality of his farming community. There, parked on their humble land like a visitor from another dimension, was the sleekest, most powerful helicopter he'd ever seen, and stepping from its mechanical womb was a figure that commanded the very air. Around him, Samuel Kingston. His mother's whispered recognition barely penetrated the roar in Jason's ears. "That's Samuel Kingston." The billionaire's approach felt like watching destiny itself walk toward him. Each step seemed to bend reality around it. When their eyes met, Jason felt something shift inside him, not just hope, but a recognition that his life was about to transform in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. "You are Jason Miller," Kingston said, and it wasn't a question, it was a statement of cosmic fact. Jason's throat felt carved from sand. "Yes, sir." Kingston's gaze swept across their modest property, the weathered farmhouse, the fields that spoke of honest labor, the rusted truck that had carried their family's dreams for decades. When his eyes returned to Jason, something indefinable passed between them. "Your father is Benjamin Miller," Kingston continued, turning to the older man. "We worked together many years ago." The handshake that followed seemed to bridge not just decades, but entire worlds. Jason's father, who had always seemed so strong, looked almost fragile next to this titan of industry. "From what I understand," Kingston continued, his voice carrying the weight of judgment itself, "your son was expelled from Westbridge Academy yesterday." The shame crashed over Jason again, threatening to drown him. He looked away, unable to meet those penetrating eyes. "Yes," he admitted, the word barely audible. "Tell me what happened." And so Jason found himself reliving his humiliation, laying bare every moment of injustice and cruelty. With each word, he felt something building inside him, not just anger, but a fierce determination that had been dormant too long. When he finished, silence stretched between them like a held breath. Kingston turned to his assistant with the casual authority of someone who commanded armies. "I want a complete dossier on Westbridge Academy's board, administration, and financial structure. I want it in 30 minutes. The assistant's fingers were already flying across his tablet. "Yes, sir." Kingston's attention returned to Jason, and for the first time, Jason saw something almost paternal in those steel-gray eyes. "I don't tolerate injustice, son. Your father was one of the most dedicated men I've ever worked with. If you possess even half of his character, then Westbridge Academy has made the gravest mistake of its institutional existence." Jason's father stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Sir, I can't tell you how much this means." Kingston raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "This isn't about gratitude, Benjamin. This is about correcting a fundamental wrong." His gaze locked onto Jason again. "Get in the helicopter." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Sir, you're coming with me. We have business to conclude at Westbridge Academy." Jason's mother found her voice, though it trembled with maternal concern. "Mr. Kingston, what exactly are you planning?" The billionaire's smile held secrets and promises in equal measure. "I'm going to ensure your son receives the future he's earned." The helicopter's interior was a masterpiece of luxury and functionality. As Jason strapped himself into leather seats that probably cost more than his family's car, he felt like he was ascending not just into the sky, but into a completely different existence. Kingston sat across from him, radiating the calm confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve. His fingers moved across his tablet with surgical precision while his assistant provided updates through sophisticated communication equipment. "Do you understand why I'm doing this?" Kingston asked, after they'd been airborne for several minutes. Jason's mind raced through possibilities. "Because you knew my father." Kingston nodded slowly, but his expression suggested deeper currents. That's part of it. But there's something else, something more fundamental. He turned his tablet toward Jason, revealing data that made Jason's breath catch. Perfect academic record. Standardized test scores in the 99th percentile. 0 disciplinary incidents. You weren't expelled for inadequacy, Jason. You were expelled for existing while poor. The words hit Jason like lightning, illuminating truths he'd felt but never articulated. I built my empire from nothing, Kingston continued, his voice taking on the cadence of someone sharing sacred knowledge. People like Principal Carter believe success is hereditary, that worth is determined by bank accounts and bloodlines. They're not just wrong, they're dangerous. They destroy potential before it can bloom. Jason felt something ignite in his chest, a fire that had been smoldering under shame and self-doubt. What happens now? Kingston's smile was sharp as winter steel. Now we remind them that true power doesn't come from inherited privilege. It comes from recognizing and nurturing excellence wherever it's found. The descent toward Westbridge Academy felt like a cosmic reversal, Jason returning not as a cast failure, but as something else entirely. The school grounds spread below them like a game board, and Jason realized he was no longer just a discarded piece. He was about to become a player in a much larger game. Students and faculty had already gathered outside, drawn by the thunderous approach of destiny itself. They stood in clusters, pointing skyward, their faces mixtures of awe and bewilderment. Some held phones aloft, instinctively understanding they were witnessing something that would become legend. The moment the helicopter touched Earth, Kingston moved with the fluid grace of someone born to command. He stepped onto the academy grounds like a conqueror claiming territory. And Jason followed, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. Principal Carter stood among the crowd, his face cycling through emotions like a broken traffic light, confusion, recognition, calculation, and finally, barely concealed terror. Kingston approached without hesitation, stopping mere inches from the man who had destroyed Jason's dreams. The space between them crackled with tension, so thick it was almost visible. I assume you know who I am, Kingston said, his voice carrying across the courtyard like a death sentence. Carter's throat worked soundlessly before he managed to croak. Mr. Kingston, this is what an unexpected. You made a mistake, Kingston interrupted, each word a hammer blow. Not just any mistake. A catastrophically expensive one. His gaze swept across the assembled crowd, students, teachers, board members, all hanging on his every word. This institution claims to shape tomorrow's leaders. Yet you discarded one of the most promising students in the state. Because he didn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable. Carter's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Kingston turned to his assistant without breaking stride. What's the largest single donation in Westbridge Academy's history? $1 million. Sir, the Pemberton Family Foundation in 2019. Kingston nodded as if confirming a mathematical equation. Then, in a voice that seemed to emanate from the earth itself, he declared, I will donate $10 million to this institution today, under one condition. The silence that followed was so complete that Jason could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. Every person in that courtyard held their breath, suspended between disbelief and desperate hope. Kingston turned back to Carter, and his next words fell like an executioner's axe. You will immediately reinstate Jason Miller with a full public apology. You have exactly 10 seconds to decide. Time became elastic. Jason watched Carter's face cycle through panic, calculation, and desperation while the numbers counted down in his head. Around them, phones captured every moment of this David and Goliath confrontation. 10. Kingston's voice was a metronome of inevitability. Carter's hands trembled as he glanced desperately at the board members, searching for salvation that wasn't coming. 5. Sweat beaded on Carter's forehead as the weight of $10 million pressed down on his shoulders like a mountain. 3. Mr. Kingston, please. 2. Carter's voice cracked like breaking glass. Of course, we would be honored to welcome Jason Miller back to our academic family. The words tumbled out in a torrent of desperation. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding, a failure of communication that I take full responsibility for. His voice rose as he addressed the crowd. I formally and publicly apologize to Jason Miller for any injustice he may have experienced, and I hereby reinstate him immediately with full honors. The apology tasted like sawdust and sounded like a confession extracted under torture, but Jason didn't care. He had won. More than that, he had been championed by power itself. Kingston let the moment stretch, savoring Carter's humiliation before giving a slight nod to his assistant. The documentation will be on your desk within the hour. See that it's processed immediately. Yes, absolutely, of course, Carter babbled, mopping his brow with a handkerchief that had appeared from nowhere. The crowd erupted in whispers that sounded like distant thunder. Jason caught glimpses of faces in the throng, some awed, others envious, all transformed by what they'd witnessed. Even Mason Blackwood stood slack-jawed, his usual arrogance replaced by something approaching fear. But Kingston wasn't finished. He turned to Jason with an expression that held depths Jason was only beginning to fathom. "This isn't about returning to where you were," he said quietly, his voice meant for Jason alone. "This is about recognizing where you belong." Jason's throat tightened. "I don't understand." Kingston gestured toward the waiting helicopter. "You have a choice to make. You can stay here, prove yourself to people who never deserved your efforts in the first place, or," he paused, letting possibilities hang in the air like stars waiting to be plucked, "you can step into a future that matches your potential." "What kind of future?" Kingston's smile held the promise of kingdoms. "I'm establishing a new educational initiative, a program designed to identify and cultivate exceptional minds that traditional institutions overlook. You would be our first scholar." Jason's world tilted again. "What would that mean?" "It means you'd train directly under my organization. You'd learn from industry leaders, innovators, visionaries. You'd gain experience that no classroom could provide." Kingston's eyes blazed with conviction. "Education is important, Jason, but real transformation happens when potential meets opportunity." The weight of the moment pressed down on Jason like gravity itself. Part of him wanted to stay, to walk these halls as a vindicated victor, to show everyone who had doubted him that he belonged. But another part, the part that had always dreamed of something bigger, recognized that this was his defining moment. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Son, when destiny knocks on your door, you don't ask it to wait while you finish your homework." Jason met Kingston's gaze and felt destiny calling his name. "I'm in." The walk to the helicopter felt like a passage between worlds. Each step carried him away from the boy who had been broken by injustice and toward the man who would be forged by opportunity. His father stood at the edge of the crowd, his face radiating pride that seemed to illuminate the very air around him. "You always taught me to recognize opportunity," Jason called out over the rising whine of the helicopter blades. "This is the opportunity of a lifetime." His father nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. "Go show them what we're made of, son. Don't let anyone ever tell you what you're worth again." The helicopter's interior enveloped Jason in luxury and purpose. As they lifted off, Westbridge Academy shrank below them until it was just another collection of buildings in an ordinary landscape. But Jason knew he was carrying something extraordinary with him, not just opportunity, but validation, not just a chance, but a destiny. "You made the right choice," Kingston said as they soared above the world Jason had known. "It doesn't feel real," Jason admitted, watching clouds drift past the window like dreams made visible. "Reality," Kingston replied, "is whatever you have the power to make it. And son, you're about to discover just how much power you really have." Their destination materialized like something from a vision, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the sky itself. The Kingston Enterprises logo blazed across its summit like a crown of fire, visible for miles in every direction. The helicopter landed on a private rooftop that felt like standing atop the world. Jason stepped out into winds that seemed to carry the whispers of empires, his heart hammering as he took in the vista of a city spread below him like a map of infinite possibilities. The building's interior was a cathedral of ambition, soaring ceilings, walls of crystalline glass, technology that seemed to pulse with its own life. Security personnel moved with military precision, their acknowledgement of Kingston bordering on reverence. They ascended to an office that redefined Jason's understanding of space and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a 360-degree view of the metropolis below, while holographic displays showed real-time data from global markets, weather patterns, and communication networks that spanned continents. "This," Kingston said, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy, "is where you'll learn what leadership really means. Not the management of people, but the orchestration of possibilities. Not the pursuit of profit, but the creation of value that transforms lives." Jason turned slowly, trying to absorb the magnitude of what he was seeing. "Why me? Really?" Kingston was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant as if he were seeing across decades. "Because I was you once," he finally said. Dismissed, underestimated, told I didn't belong. But someone saw past the circumstances to the potential underneath. Someone gave me a chance to prove what I was capable of. His eyes refocused on Jason, with laser intensity. Now it's my turn to be that someone for you. The emotion that surged through Jason was almost overwhelming: gratitude, determination, and something else. Something that felt like destiny recognizing itself. Kingston placed a hand on Jason's shoulder, and the gesture felt like a benediction. This is just the beginning, son. You're not just going to prove them wrong. You're going to redefine what's possible. For the first time in his life, Jason didn't just hope for a better future, he could feel it calling his name. See it spreading out before him like a road paved with stars. The boy who had been expelled for being unworthy was gone. In his place stood someone else entirely, someone ready to seize the universe itself.